some experts to start doing observations. So the second we would consider as the observation. Yeah, but not doing exactly interviews, but more like observation of how they use the target. And the third one was sharing ideas between the team members and try to get more insights as possible.
Okay. Okay, that's a great start. So 3 steps. I've kind of renamed things a little bit. So you called it some research. It normally will start with a design brief from a client. They didn't have a client team. But normally a client would come along and say, you know, here's our product line. We need a new one of these, or we need the next one. Or, you know, the world's changed and our competitors have come up with this, or the market's got that, and the needs of that, and here's what you need to do for us. There's some kind of briefing. Since they didn't have that, they did research on their own, which would normally be part of this kind of initial thing. They might have a kind of a kickoff meeting, which I think you did see. You saw they had an initial meeting with a dozen people on the team getting together, and they kind of explored and understood this research. So the research could include some background data. Maybe some personal experience too, but the background data, the thing is, background data you can get before you do the field research. You got to leave the office to do this. Background data could include, well, you saw they had some information here. You know how big is the market? You know who makes shopping carts? Who buys them? What's the price point? How long do they last? Something about, you know, that injury, something like that. Maybe it's hard to find. Maybe you can do this online. Maybe you can do it by talking to your client. But this is all kind of background. Anything else you noticed they did in that design briefing, kickoff meeting at the very start? What else did you notice? What else is coming up there?
Also, there was a real kind of the experiment with
Yeah. Right. So you can actually do something that's called benchmarking. You could actually get all the competing products. Right? So you get, here's our product, here's the competitor's product, here's what they do, what they don't do, what we know about them. All that, you can think of that as background basics before you ever get out into the field. Let's talk about field research. So this is the kind of what I called go and see, right? First of all, why exactly do we need to do this? Every one of the people on that project team is a customer, right? They all have had personal experience with this product. So why do you think they had to get out and talk to other people when we already got a dozen customers right here in the room? So what's that about? Yes, please, in the back. Okay, so each of them has maybe experienced certain things, certain problems, or successes, right? Each of us has some experience, but you're saying that's not, what, not complete? Or it's only today and current and... Okay. All right. So what else do we need to get out there into the field? Yes, please.
No assumption, and then taking the phrase from fear is that whoever get a customer, whoever owns the customer, owns everything.
Yeah. So it could be that if we can truly get out there and understand customers, we're going to have a different and broader perspective. But you know, we ourselves are customers, so there's something narrow about that. So I think you got to. I don't think anybody's really put their finger on this just yet. Anybody particularly needs upfront tables? Yes, please.
So I'd say the impact is getting out and talking to not just like customers, but people who deal with product, like they work in the stores and stuff.
Okay, so that's a really important point. So each of us may have been one type of customer, let's say a user. And a user is only one of the important stakeholders, people who matter in the life cycle of this cart. User is only one of them. In fact, well, first of all, there are multiple types of users, right? And we'll get to that in a moment. But the point up here is that, well, that's just one type of stakeholder. So the user, for some products, the purchaser is the user. Not for this product, right? So there is actually an owner, right? I mean, there's somebody who actually cares, like, how much do they cost? You as a customer, a user, you don't care how much it costs, right? So that person matters. And then, as you point out, there are other clerks and workers and people who, let's say, repair shopping carts, collect shopping carts, wash the shopping carts, line them up, whatever, right? All those people, so those are other, I don't know, let's call them workers, or the staff at the store, right? They're different stakeholders too, and they could have some really useful insights for us. If we go back to users for the moment, let's just remember, there are many different types of users, right? So here we're talking about shoppers, right? People who use the shopping carts. What different types? And the reason, and by different types, normally we think of them as different segments, right? Different market segments. They may or may not be different segments. We don't know, right? But what are the different types of users who might have different needs or issues or problems? Yes, what are they? Okay, so parents who shop with their children, right? In tow, in the cart, nearby, with them, and so forth. And what other types of shoppers, customers are there? Yes? Okay, something I had never heard of before, but a professional shopper who... Yep, but the key thing is that the professional shopper is shopping for other people, not for their own, groceries, right? They're shopping for others, and they have maybe a list, and maybe they know the store really well, and they're on a time or efficiency matters, whatever, so that they would have potentially different needs. And what other types of users are there? Yes? Okay. Yep, people are, want to shop really quick. Maybe they only need 3 things, but they want to get in and they want to get out really fast. Who else? What is it? Yeah, grandparents. And but let me just broaden that to whether they have grandchildren or not. Let me just say elderly. Because elderly may be less strong. They may have less dexterity, so... and they might buy different food and things too, but in particular, they would have different needs. And the key thing is that these users could have different needs, not just from each other, but from the design team. You notice that design team? It was, a bunch of young folks, right? Their 20s, 30s, some folks only a little bit older than that. And maybe nobody has ever been a clerk in the store or washed the shopping cart or fixed the wheels or whatever. So we got to get out there and talk to real folks in the real market. Now, next, you talked about interviews versus observation. What's the difference? What's going on there? What do we learn in interviews versus observation? Yes, please. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so one really important point is, in an interview, it's a direct interaction. I'm asking a question, or I'm speaking with a customer about their experience or problems or something like that. Observations can be more, can be done without actually directly interacting. It's more passive. And the key thing is we might be able to observe things that they wouldn't say. Okay, so maybe their behaviors, and maybe we can try to figure out how they operate and what's the problem. Have you ever noticed that there's a difference in what people say and what they do? And the idea here is the observation is to get at what they actually do. They may say that I don't know, I'm just making this up, take the most efficient path through the store, or always take the same path, or always do this, or always do that. But in fact, maybe I don't. And so, but we can observe things. Do you think there's any? Can you identify something they observed that you think they might not have readily learned from a customer? What did they observe? Yes, please. Well, first of all, that's something they created, so the cart didn't do that on its own. Perhaps they observed a problem. And so what problem might that have been? Okay, so so they might have observed some difficulty in maneuvering, whereas when they spoke with customers about the shopping cart, they might not have ever said that. You know, I have a hard time turning that corner. But you can make that observation. Exactly. Yes, please. Yep, they may have learned that also by talking directly to them. I don't know, but you're right. They showed you that observation. Okay, so another thing let me just point out is that there are photographs involved. And the interesting thing about photos, of course, we could have real data, and we're going to talk about the kind of data that we get here. And essentially, there's data, what we call voice of the customer, and that's what customers said. They told us this stuff. And then generally, the voice of the customer is to kind of captures what they said in an interview or a direct interaction. And the photos are to capture the observation. So the reason to take so many photographs is that we can now bring into this discussion and sharing what have we seen, okay? What have we observed? All right. All right, so now let's talk about what they learned from all this. So what was the process they used to share this information? They went out to the grocery store. They come back. What did they do to share that information? Yes, please.
Everything around the room and then they share.
So they put things around the room. What did they put around the room? So now hold on. So the ideas did not come then. That was, I don't know, this stuff, creating and brainstorming. We'll talk about that next. The key thing is, first of all, they put their photos around the room. And they also talked about, this is what we learned. Let me give you a little bit of the kind of the real deal of what's going on here. What we're actually looking for is what we call customer needs. What this is all about is figuring out what are the needs. Now, the term needs, that's just kind of a term in the trade. It doesn't literally mean needs. But the idea is that these are problems and values of our customers, okay? And what we say is that there are different types of needs, okay? And let me just talk about 3 types. The easy kind are obvious needs. If I can spell that correctly, that would help. Some needs are obvious, such as, and when I say obvious, I mean we probably knew this before we went out into the field. So such as the shopping cart has to carry all the food. Right? I mean, that's obvious, right? The current shopping carts do that. Probably we don't have a good solution if we can't do that. And we knew it. And our competitors knew it. If all we did is learn the obvious stuff, we wasted our time. Okay? But it's important because we have to remember that, the shopping cart has to carry the food. It's got to carry all our shopping, right? So carrying is kind of an easy or obvious customer need. The second type of customer need that we want to learn through the sharing, the second type are what we're going to call unfulfilled. And the unfulfilled needs, this is what we generally call latent needs. And latent means hidden. Okay, so the needs are there. Hold on a second. I'm not jumping ahead of me. Unfulfilled needs are needs that are not being well addressed. Okay, so unaddressed. So, and these are things like, for example, child safety. Right, so they knew about child safety being a problem, and they observed some terrible things. So that was clearly not being addressed. And I guess I would argue that's even more important than these obvious needs, because this suggests there's a real opportunity to do those better. And then the third type of needs are the hidden ones, or what we call latent needs. So here's where they come in. And latent needs are needs that are very difficult for customers to express. So very likely in a conversation, in an interview, it doesn't come up. But these needs exist. They're just hidden. They're hard to find. And these are things that maybe our competitors don't know. But if we could address them, it could be really, perhaps, a real innovation. An example of a latent need here, maybe for the shopping cart, might be that business around the checkout delay, which is around speed. And, maybe no customer ever talked about this problem with the shopping cart related to the checkout delay. So 3 types of needs. And the key point is these are kind of in increasing importance. They're more important as we go down. And this whole phase of exploration has to end with that. Okay? If we go out into the field and all we learn is the easy stuff, we haven't really learned anything of value. But if we can identify there are some unfulfilled needs, that if we could fulfill them, we could have a real improvement. Or there are some latent needs that are maybe new, or they're hidden, or they're not been well articulated, and they're also obviously not being addressed. Maybe we can fulfill those too. Maybe we can't, right? Okay. Anything? So this is where the exploration phase ends, and it kind of ends with these new insights. And that's this stuff here. That's where it ends. And you saw all that on day 1 of that in that video. Okay, let's see what did they do on day 2. So day 2 was the day for the creation. And let's see, these tables in the next row worked on that, right? So who wants to just give us an outline of the process that was used for creation? Who's got that? Yes, over here, please. Please. They what? They stopped it, okay. And did what?
And then from that, they went through the new insight and discovered which 4 mockups to actually produce.
Yeah, okay. I think you kind of missed the whole business of the brainstorming, which we got to talk about, right? So they had these insights that came out of the field work. And the first thing they did, though I guess the next morning, it was the brainstorming. So we got to talk about that one, right? So that's how they created a whole bunch of ideas. Okay, so one of the kind of principles is of brainstorming is that wild ideas are okay, which is kind of strange. So we should talk a little bit about that. Why does that work so well? What else about the brainstorming? Yes, please. Okay, so the principle, the brainstorming principle, that's how we describe that is suspend judgment. So, being judgmental is important so that we can figure out what's good and what's not good. But for the brainstorming session, we hold that judgment. What else about brainstorming? Yes, please. Okay. In fact, how many ideas did they come up with? Any idea? 10? 20? Sorry? Well, this whole process they went through once, but just in the brainstorming part. The voiceover said they had literally. Yeah, they had hundreds of ideas. Like we don't really know, but yeah, so they had hundreds of ideas. Maybe a couple hundred, and they're all over the place. The interesting thing is this is brainstorming kind of with rules. So this is kind of, maybe an example of the kind of answer to the question earlier. Like here we have process here. Does that stifle creativity? And here we had brainstorming that's actually done with rules. Now, first of all, I'm sure you've all done brainstorming. That process for brainstorming was not invented by IDEO. It was actually invented about 70 years ago by this guy named Osborne. He wrote a book about brainstorming and named it and all that. And so it's been around for a long time. But what you saw here was, let me just say, I think it was a very good example of brainstorming, okay? And they did it with some rules. And there are rules like suspend judgment. Don't be critical. Don't nail someone's idea if you don't think it's any good. Even wild ideas are okay. And those two rules go along with a third one, which is build on the ideas of others. The reason these work together, okay, first of all, wild ideas. By definition, that means things that won't work. Okay? Why is it that wild ideas are beneficial? Why are they helpful? They inspire what? Okay, yeah, so it could be that the wild idea is not actually practical, but at least it informs or inspires the group that, you know what, there's another portion of the solution space. Maybe it's not a really great one, but it's out there too. And maybe it broadens our just thinking and understanding of the solution space. Why else are wild ideas helpful? Yes, please. So it hints as to what's the borders of the bounds of what's reasonable. Okay, so what's reasonable is maybe not quite that far out, but maybe there's something that's halfway there that could be useful. So in fact, it goes along with these other two things. The reason wild ideas are helpful is it might stimulate other people to have other ideas. So that's why we have to suspend judgment. Because if we say, no, 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 that clearly won't work, then we will not encourage others to build on that idea or solve that problem of the reason it won't work. So these things kind of go together. So you saw brainstorming with rules. Pretty well done. All right, so that's the first thing you saw in creation. What did they do next? They had hundreds of ideas and did what? Yes, please. They voted. Okay? So the voting is what we call down selection. So down selection means I have, well, hundreds of ideas, and let's figure out, and not the best idea, right? Which is normally what voting is for, right? If you have a vote in like an election, who's the best candidate? What is the winner? That's not what they were doing here. They're trying to identify, let's just call it the most promising or the most interesting few. So we're going from many to few, not to one, but many to few. And you saw them do a specific type of voting. It's called multivoting. Who can explain how they did it? How did they run multivoting? What did they do? How'd that work? Yes, please. Each person gets multiple votes. Okay, and then we tally up which one has the most votes. What else did you notice about the multivoting?
So they didn't say, like we didn't say, oh, I voted for that one. So it wasn't a string of everyone. They put a sticker on.
Okay, they did it visually. So they put little stickers or they use sticker notes, but sometimes we do them with bullets. On a whiteboard, we just do them with the markers. Everybody, you get 10 votes and you put 10 dots or stars or whatever. So the idea is it's visual. That is, it's open. So think about this. This is what we call eponymous multivoting, which is the opposite of anonymous multivoting. So anonymous means secret. And you could do multivoting in the secret. Say, everybody write down your 10 best ideas. And then you add them up. They didn't do that. So why did they do eponymous? Eponym, that means my name. That means with your name, right? So we know whose vote is whose, because we see them voting, or they write their names, or whatever. Why is that a good thing? Why eponymous multivoting? Why open multivoting instead of secret multivoting? Yes, please. Uh-huh. Exactly. So we can ask, why did you vote for that? Why else?
Collaboration, trust.
Okay. It might help us build collaboration trust. There's also a little bit more to it. Yes? How so? Yep. So you might be able to communicate, this is what I like about this because we could build it this way or do it like this or it solves that problem. There's also something about, so since we know whose idea it is, right? So let's say Matthew votes for this one idea and we know it's his vote. Okay, so we could go and ask Matthew, why'd you vote for that crazy idea? Or maybe, since that takes time, challenging every vote, we don't do that. We know who he is, right? And we know Matthew's an expert in human factors, let's say, right? And he votes for this really interesting interface, and we say, you know what? There's something to it, and he knows that's going to work. That's really great. I'll vote for that too, so we can influence each other. So the principle here is this. If we got hundreds of ideas, we can't possibly evaluate them all in any depth. Well, we could, but we're not going to take that much time. So it's a pretty quick way to get lots of processing, like all of us are thinking about it all at once, and we're each focusing on different subset, let's say, and we can take that information in to account in our own votes. So it's a pretty efficient way to do down selection. So this is fast. It's not the only way to do down selection. If they had a week, they probably wouldn't do it this way, all right? But they did a pretty quick way to do it. Okay, what did they do next? So they did brainstorming. They did down selection. What next? What came next? Yes, please. What came next? Okay, into teams to do what? Okay, so to work on some severe pain points and do what with them? Okay, so they actually build. So they actually built pretty quick mock-ups. Which, how would you describe those mock-ups? So they chose, as you said, 4 need areas. Well, you call them pain points. So we had to figure out what those 4 were. So they did 4 of these mock-ups, and the nature of these mock-ups was they were pretty quick. They spent just a couple of hours. So they were quick, and they were very rough. They're made with, wood and zip ties and duct tape and cardboard. It was very crude, right? Not the kind of work you would show to a customer. It was just, but it was for the purpose of exploring, can we solve these need areas? So let's figure out, so what were those 4 need areas? So, so there was something about child safety was one of them. So that, I don't know if that's a security one you had in mind. So child safety. I don't think theft was one. What else was on that? What was it? Say it again? Storage. It was carrying. I think they called it shopping, but I think it meant carrying. So they called it shopping, but it was about carry and storage, you know, carry all the stuff. What else? Shop. Checkout. Checkout delay. So checkout. And what was the fourth one? It was not theft. That was the solution. What was the need area? It was not navigation. It was about finding. Yeah, it was about finding. And I'm trying to push you guys to differentiate between needs and solution. So communicate with the store clerk is a solution to the need area. So the need areas were child safety, shopping and carrying, checkout, and finding. Those are four, you call them pain points. In fact, how would you categorize them here? So one of them was an obvious need, because you know what? It better carry all the stuff. One of them was an unaddressed need, safety. One of them was a latent need, checkout delay. And the other one, I would say, was also a latent need, the finding, right? So that's probably finding or search. Okay? So they picked four key insights that they learned in the field and said, can we solve those? And they asked a sub-team, a small sub-team, to work on, can we solve any of those four, based on all this great brainstorming. Okay, what did they do next? Yes, please. Okay, so they tested these things? Well, not exactly. I mean, maybe they did. We didn't see that. But normally, I think they would do a lot of that. They would take these mock-ups, and they would do a bunch of refines and iterations on that. You didn't see them do any of that, but normally that would be a big part of the process. So what did they do? So they built these four mock-ups. What did they do? Yeah, so this is kind of an abbreviated process. They had these four mock-ups, and they said, all right, maybe we can do all four, which is kind of strange. Normally, you would take these four and pick one, or maybe pick one and build it into an existing or standard solution. They actually took all four of them and did a kind of integrated design and build. And what they built is what's called an alpha prototype. An alpha prototype is a model. It's not a rough model. It's a more refined model. They spent a couple days designing and building it, which is all the time they had here. But an alpha prototype has two features. It looks like the real product might. And I say might, meaning if we chose to implement exactly this. And maybe we don't, but you know, if we chose to implement, this looks like it, like the real thing. And it works like the final product might, if we chose to build exactly this, okay? And that's integrated all together into a single model. And the reason that they're integrated together is so that you can do, you know, what comes next, which is testing and feedback. Which you saw them do at the end. They went out to the store and they showed it to customers and they tried it out and they filled it with food and all that. And if this were perfect, then they would go and do all the detailed design work to implement it. Let me point out, that's expensive. Right? The implementation is the expensive part. All this, well, here is just abbreviated, but they only spent a week. Whereas the implementation, if they were to build exactly this, you know, could take them months more work to do detailed design and CAD and tooling and supply chain and ramp up, all that kind of stuff. So that could be very expensive and take a long time. which is why it makes sense to do lots of iterations around here. Now, if this were a real project, they would have done a bunch more iterations around this stuff, as we were talking about. So some refinement here, and maybe a design review with clients and stuff like that. They would have done a bunch more feedback and iterations on this. And then they'd make a decision, is this worth implementing? Have we really solved the problem? And should we spend the money to implement this? OK, that's the creation phase. Yes, please. Yes.
There was a moment when they talked about the adult meeting, the other side of the room.
Yes.
Where was that?
Where was that? So that was kind of after this, to help them to figure out what 4 need areas, how should we do this part? So they had a little session to figure out what should that step be exactly. Yeah. OK, so that's the process that you saw for at least these 2 phases. You didn't see the implementation phase, but because they didn't implement it. So now let's figure out the organization. OK? And by organization, I mean the people. Who are the people, the teams, and how is the leadership done, all that. OK, so that's this kind of side of the room. Who wants to? So let's talk about the teams first, and then maybe leadership. So we talk about the people and teams first? OK, so let's talk about what? The project team, right? OK. OK. And when you say democratic, which maybe is a decent word, and flat describes some kind of organizational structure, I think the key thing is that it was inclusive. That people contributing, all those people and voices were valued and included. So I'm just going to write, I'm going to call it that, inclusive. What else about the team? OK. OK, so it was, I'm going to call it an eclectic mix. Because, so cross-functional, this is just a slightly broader term for that. We've heard about cross-functional teams for years and years and years, right? And look, if you were to design a shopping cart, OK, this thing's made out of steel. You've seen it before, right? If you were to develop to bring together a cross-functional team with multiple disciplines involved, what would those functions normally be? Who would you look to? Mechanical engineer, because it's, you know, metal and steel and bending and welding and who else? Materials, maybe? Industrial design, because we want some good user interface. Manufacturing engineer. So that would be the obvious stuff, right? They had a broader group. So they had psychology and anthropology and consumer behavior. And so what's that about? So why such a very, very broad, and I actually think including a bunch of kind of soft skills in addition to the normal, I don't know, engineering or hard skills or the obvious ones, right? Why? Why'd they do that? So it could be that it gives them a broader perspective. A broader set of views is going to give them a broader perspective. On what? On life, politics, religion? I mean, like, but on the users, exactly. So it could be that this eclectic project team is going to help them to do a better job. Okay? So that's interesting. That they didn't just have kind of the normal cross-functional team of mechanical and materials and manufacturing engineers, which is probably what I would have done. I mean, it's kind of the obvious thing to do, okay? They had a broader set of skills. What else about the team? Okay, so let's talk about the team leadership. Do you have anything else on the team itself?
Yeah, I think they are trying to build a collective approach and try to develop a kind of a collective
Yeah.
Actually, they're thinking about how to get outside the box, and you cannot just start from the bottom to the outside.
Yeah.
Find many tools and tools.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think that's quite true, that no individual on the team perhaps could have developed this particular innovation. There's just something about the group and the group's process and dynamic and the way they value each other that kind of works together. So I think that's a really important point. Okay, let's talk about team leadership. Who wants to describe the team leadership? And if there are no volunteers, we'll turn to you once again. Go ahead. Okay, so let me just differentiate between the team leadership and senior management. And you saw a little bit of both. So the team leader is that fellow Peter. Okay, so he was the guy, and they said he's the project leader and so forth. Let's talk about the team leadership. So why was Peter the project leader? What is it about him that made him the right choice for this particular role? Yes, please.
Not because of his seniority, but because he works well with groups.
Okay, so he's clearly got some kind of group, what we're going to call people skills. For example, what people skills did he have? I mean, they didn't just say so, but you saw. What people skills did you see evidence of? Yes, please.
I guess the very important thing about people skills he had is he knew exactly where to let go of the control and where he should again bring back the control.
Uh-huh.
He figured out.
Uh-huh.
I guess that's one thing.
And what else? Because I think that blends a little bit of the kind of the people skills and the other type of skills, which is the process skills, which I think that was maybe a better example of. So the idea that, in terms of process skills, so a process skill is to say, we're going to start with this, everybody. We're having a kickoff meeting, and we got some background, and then we're going to split up and do some field work. And, we have to do that. And after we're done with the field research, you're going to come back, and we're going to share what we learned. And everybody's going to tell us that stuff. And then we're going to develop a list of needs, and we're not going to finish this phase until we've got some new insights. That, set of, it's time to stop doing this and start doing this, that's a process knowledge, right? And maybe it takes some people skills to get the group to do that and to believe that. So for example, to say, we're going to split up now. We're not going to all together go over to Trader Joe's. We're going to split up. And you got 4 sub-teams, and you want you guys to talk to these folks, and you talk to those stakeholders, and you look at this, and then we're all going to share what we learned. Okay? And that takes people skills to get people to kind of, line up and do that. Even if it's just for a couple of hours, this is what you got to do now. And then similarly, there's process skills to say, look, we're going to do the brainstorming, and we've done enough of that. Even though there's still more ideas we haven't talked about, it's time to down select. And then, we're going to build these, split into 4 sub-teams, take these 4 need areas, and solve those problems as best you can. And then we're going to build an integrated design and so forth. So those are the process skills that he has. So the people skills are about getting the people to do what he knows is the right process. And this process is something that if you worked at IDEO, you'd learn that process too. And if you have the right people skills, you could be a project team leader. And then another week or another month, he's not a team leader. He's on another project, and someone else is the team leader. Okay, so the team leader includes those 2 skills. Next, senior management. And you saw a little bit of the kind of adult side meetings. We talked about that a little bit. So what really is the role of senior management here in this company? Yes, please. Okay, so for one thing, probably sell. Business development, sell the client, and then bring together the right team. Okay, so there is senior management involved in business development for sure. You didn't see any of that, although maybe you did see that one sort of client meeting on the side, and that was in a neat conference room with coffee and slides and whatever. So there's business development. It's an important role for senior management. What else? Maybe what did you see, evidence related to senior management here? Timing and schedule, so imposing the schedule. And that's often part of biz dev, right? So we promise the client that in 1 month we're going to have a design review. We're going to show us our best 3 ideas. And so there's something about maybe kind of timing, which is kind of contracted. What else is important here about senior management? Yes, please. Okay. And we're going to get to that in culture, but I actually think the role is to create that culture. So there's something, and you guys may be familiar with this. I'm not sure you talk about it yet this week. It's called the founder's effect. This relates highly to new businesses in particular. The founder's effect says that the culture of an organization is set pretty early on. So if you're the founder of a new enterprise, you're going to create the culture of that organization the first few years. And the interesting thing about the founder's effect is how long it lasts. It could last for decades. The culture of the place is set pretty early on and can last a long time. In fact, it can even last beyond the departure of the founder. The founder leaves, dies, sells, moves on, whatever, and the culture of the place lives on beyond the founder. So creating that culture, so sure, Dave Kelly, and you saw him in the video, he set that up, right? He also, what did you see him doing in the video? Dave Kelly, the CEO, founder of this company, what did you see him doing? What was he doing? Yeah, well, so he was being playful, which is maybe part of the culture. So he was, yeah. So he's setting an example, right? So when he sits in a project team and he's not being disruptive, he's not saying, I've got the best idea, the rest of you guys are new here. He's not doing that at all. He's sitting back, he's giving his ideas. He doesn't care if you disagree with him. That's a great example to set, okay? So he's actually leading, he's setting a great example. And I guess the other thing I would say he's doing is he's getting out of the way. Like he wasn't telling the project team leader what to do next and what to do now and what to do how, right? He was getting out of the way. So I'm going to write that down. Yeah. Okay, the last part I want to talk about, culture. So what is the culture of this place? And the way we kind of talk about culture here is we say, there's values, which is kind of unwritten stuff. So like, you can write down, how a team works or who reports to whom or what's the org structure, all that. That's not the culture. The culture is sort of the values of the place. And the culture may be evidenced by certain artifacts. So you might have some of those in mind. But what do you suppose are the values? Well, so the team groups in the back, you guys worked on culture. What are some of the words that you used to describe the culture? So yes, do you have a list of some words, please? Playful. That's something that we talked about already a little bit. What else? Exploratory, something like that. What else? Motivating. What else? Who else has some more? Yes, please. Empowering. What else are some words? freedom. Is that what you said? Okay. Creative. Did you say doers? Doing. Yep. So doing. So action. Action bias, I guess, is the way we might describe it. A bias for action. It's not plastic, which means it's. Is that what you said?
I thought it said iconoclastic.
Iconoclastic. I got it. Okay. Yeah. So they're different, you know. And what else? Fearless. Why are they fearless? Why are they fearless? No punishment. Yeah, which means it's kind of okay to fail. You know, failure is okay because failure is part of our exploring and our learning process and, you know, our creative process. You know, failure is part of creation, right? You try a whole bunch of things, you figure out which ones work, and some of them don't work, and that's okay. Yeah, so, yeah, that's the culture of this place. So, let me ask, how does this culture support that organization? Yes, please.
I think the culture is really strong. It bonds them together.
Yeah, it bonds them together. In what way? Yeah. What else?
I think it's a very unique environment for innovation. So I think they're pretty much building like, what can I say, it's like an ecosystem, you know, like
Right.
different things because it would be very hard to do the same thing with the same people in a regular office. So I think that actually pretty much everything is part of the innovation process. Not only people, not only the space, not only the furniture, everything together is
Yeah. It kind of works together as a system, which is really the point that I'm trying to make here. I'm going to just sort of let's see if we can put our finger. Let me try to draw some connections that illustrate the systemic nature of this. So the culture itself. So we said the culture is playful and exploratory. How does that help? Well, what are we playing and exploring with, right? Well, we're playing and exploring with mock-ups. And if we say, look, it's okay if some of these mock-ups don't work, I asked you to explore. Can you solve that problem of child safety? And if you can't do it, well, fine. Maybe nobody could solve that, right? But it's okay to fail on that. And so we're saying that's going to help you to do that. In fact, how does it enable the brainstorming? You know, so we're free and creative and, you know, we're motivating and that's enabling this brainstorming. And it says, you know, everybody's involved. This is inclusive. And, you know, we're eclectic and iconoclastic and strange, and that's all part of being creative. I think you guys also said that maybe this mix of people, this eclectic mix, maybe that helps us to do some of this stuff. Maybe to do a better job of going and seeing, and maybe having insights and making observations and learning about what's in the market and what might be possible or what are the problems to solve. And so this is actually enabling us to do a good job of the key thing we have to do, which is the innovation. Yes, please. Well, that's a good question. So I think on the one hand, yes, this is their core capability. If we look at IDEO, or really any really successful design consultancy firm, they've got to be good at this. I mean, if they weren't good at this, people wouldn't pay them all that money for their client engagements, you know, to create stuff. So yes, this is their core capability. This is the key capability they have, is being innovative, right? The part about being copied, well, I'm not so sure about that. So first of all, well, you guys just figured it out, right? And much of this exists in pretty much every other design firm. And much of this exists in our design classes at MIT and the classes at Stanford and the classes at Indian Institute of Technology, and they use my textbook that I wrote about this like all over the world. So I actually think a lot of this is actually pretty directly transferable. Maybe what they've done, though, is to make it just a little bit more systematic, though, right? Because very few people have been able to do this over and over and over again the way a consultancy does. Okay, what else about the systemic nature of this? Yes, please.
For me, is important thing about don't have the figure of the lonely genius.
Okay.
This is an important thing about ideal. They really can do it with very different kind of teams and things like that. I think at this point, put out the figure of the guy that can do everything that and be in the front of it is an important thing inside the company.
Right. So I think that's a really important point. You didn't see a lone genius. You didn't see this very special inventor, founder, creative person, and everybody else implementing and lining up and bowing down beside him, right? You didn't see that, okay? Whereas most of the stories you hear about innovation involves that genius inventor, right? I mean, you heard a bunch of them this week and another. So how do you reconcile that? Why do we hear so much about that creative genius, and yet here's this super reliable systematic process that creates innovation? How do you sort of reconcile those two? Yes, please.
Also, they don't produce for one particular industry, therefore they need people from multiple backgrounds to come in and give input and feedback. So I think therefore it makes sense to not have one central figure because he or she would be specialized.
Yep.
Whereas everyone else can contribute.
Right. Okay. So other thoughts on how this kind of all works together as a system? Yes, in the very back, please. Uh-huh. So first of all, I don't know exactly how they do their internal reviews and evaluation and so forth, but in organizations like this, I mean, I don't know exactly specifically for IDEO, but in organizations like this, first of all, they talk about a flat organization with no hierarchy. That's just not true. I mean, there is seniority, and people have a boss, and they are in some kind of organizational departments or functions. And so, for example, the engineers or different types of engineers, they're evaluated by the senior person in that function. And so they actually have performance evaluation, because they do. The second thing is they also have, organizations like this also have performance based on, reward based on project performance. If you're on a great project that does a great job, that counts also for you and everybody else on your project team. And so generally organizations like this have some combination of sort of your individual performance based on what you did in your function and its contributions, and the kind of group or project or team performance based on what the team did for clients or for us or whatever. And so that's generally the way it works in organizations like this. It'd be interesting, and we could talk, we don't have to talk too much in depth about IDEO as one specific example of that, but that's a key thing there. Yeah, because Elaine, you know a bit about this, right?
I worked for Continual Innovation, previously Design Continual, which is an IDEO wannabe that never got all the way there. So,
but it's pretty similar in a lot of ways.
yeah, so this is how in the mid-90s they were organized. They like to recreationally restructure every year or so. So I don't know how they're organized now. Everybody, this is a matrix organization. Everyone, like Steve said, reports to a functional head. So the engineers will report to a functional manager. The designers will report to a functional designer. Project teams are spawned, also organized to that.
Okay, but you're just going to have to, for the moment, you just have to believe us that this is pretty sustainable and it works in this kind of organization. We can talk about, is that the kind of organization you want to set up for your own business? That's different. But this stuff works here. All right, look, I want to wrap up on this, the story around IDEO with the following. So I've tried to illustrate that this is systematic. One of the features of systematic processes, if they're going to be repeatable and reliable, they need to also have controls. And the controls relate to things like reviews and stuff. So I'm going to show you how those come in, because you didn't see any of those because there was no client, all right? So I'm going to just put this screen down so I can do that. I'll put it back up later if you guys want to take a photo during the break or something. But for now, okay. So this is a view of their process that says, and it uses those 3 phases that we discussed earlier, and they actually literally have reviews in the phases. You guys have probably all heard of stage review and phase review and stage gate and all those kind of standard review processes in industry. This can actually be applied in this very creative context too, and here's how. So first of all, in order to make it systematic, we kind of split up the work. What happens at the beginning and what happens at the end is not the same stuff. And so that's where you got this explore, create, implement. And there's specific things that happen in each. We talked about what happened in explore. We talked about what happened in create. You didn't see any implement, but good work would happen there too. Next, after each phase, there has to be some way to say, did we get this right? And if we got it right, we'll move on. And if we didn't get it right, we either cancel the project because we got nothing, or we move back and iterate and keep repeating it until we get it right. And if there's going to be a way to do that, typically there's a meeting or a review or an approval or something like that. Typically with a client, the client would be involved in that. And so at each stage, if there's going to be a review, if we're going to be systematic about this, there ought to be requirements or expectations for each of those reviews. And so at each one, there's kind of an expectation. So for example, at the very beginning of this, we had to have a good client brief. And we didn't really talk about exactly what goes into that, but there's actually some pretty interesting research that shows what makes a really good design brief. So they have a way to kind of check those and make sure it's got the right open sort of challenge and the right motivation, all that. Here, if we go through this whole process of exploration and didn't really learn anything new, then we probably didn't do a good job of that. Maybe there's nothing new to learn, but they don't really take on challenges that have nothing new to learn. So they take on contemporary challenges where the world's changed or technology's changed, and there ought to be some new insights to generate, and we got to figure them out. And so if we don't have any, latent needs, unaddressed needs that could be improved upon, then we haven't done a good job of that. And if we do, then we got the right stuff that could be the seeds of innovation. So then we would move on to that second phase, the creation phase. Now, how do we know that we did the creation phase right? Just because we created a prototype? No. How do we know we've got a really, truly useful and potentially successful innovation? And that's where this comes in. So we talked about the kind of the market human desire side of things. Is there a real need and have we solved it? That we've got a great solution and we believe we can deliver that in a feasible, cost-effective way and so forth. And that gives us potentially the beginnings of a business model, the cost side of a business model. And we believe that there is a market and a cost and a price point that looks at least sustainable, if not super profitable, right? And if we don't think we've got all 3 of those, then we don't spend the big bucks to implement it. We should stop right there and say, okay, is there nothing possible here? Or should we do some more of this creation until we really have what we really believe is a solid, useful, and potentially successful innovation? Okay, so this is how they make it systematic. And I guess the last thing I want to do today, we got 15 minutes, is to say, okay, could this work in an entrepreneurial context? I mean, it works for IDEO, it works for Continuum, and 20 other firms that work this way, but that's not you. If you were running one of those companies, you wouldn't be here this week. You'd have some, but can this work in other contexts? For example, in the entrepreneurial context. So do you have a question before we move on to that? Okay, so these are the 3 dimensions that they have to evaluate. And the one that they can test through that concept test is this one. How does the market react to that? And so what we call that a concept test, because all we've got at this point is the concept. We don't have the details, and we haven't figured out all kinds of stuff. But we have a concept. And the idea is that we did all this research about what the market is and lacks and needs and what's the opportunity. And then we have a solution, and we hope that it addresses that opportunity. And the purpose of the concept test is to go and check in the market, is this a winning concept before we spend the money to ramp that up? And so that's exactly what they're doing in that testing. And I think you're right. Primarily the field test tests this part. We can figure out, is it robust? Is it reliable? Is it safe and all that kind of stuff more likely through internal testing. Right. No. Yeah, normally it wouldn't be like that. That was the kind of fake part because this was for a TV production, right? Right. So normally you would have client reviews, and they would do a whole bunch of testing. And first of all, they wouldn't normally do this in 4 days. They normally do this in 4 months, right? So you're seeing a whole lot of shortcuts. So don't worry too much about that part. Okay. So now look, I want to ask. You've seen this whole process here. You've seen it a little bit in action in a somewhat realistic context. How about in your context? So where could this way of thinking, this design thinking, or this creative approach, where could this apply in developing new ventures? Is this for what you're going to do tonight for your project homework? Or and I don't really care what you do this week. This is really more about going forward in your professional lives. How can this work in an entrepreneurial context? So you want to start, please?
Well, I'd say definitely apply not just to innovation of the product or thing that you're working on, but probably also apply it to business models as well. See how to develop other.
Okay. So when you say you could apply it to business models, what do you really have in mind? Okay. Right. So when we think about, we talked about all this in that kind of product context, as if we're making a manufactured physical good. But if what we're trying to innovate is a business process or a business model, maybe we can apply some of the same techniques and approach. Maybe some go and see field work would apply to checking out business models and things like that. Okay. I think that's a good place to start. Yes, please. Yeah, so you could think of it that way, although I'd actually like to think that in exploring, we're exploring not just the market, we're also exploring, the competition, and we're exploring maybe price points and kind of all that kind of stuff. And in creation, we might actually be thinking about that whole ecosystem of the product, the service around it, the price point, the feasibility. So actually, the way I'm thinking of it is that those 3 things, the 3 things you talked about, you're kind of thinking about them all here. You're thinking about them all again here. And you're actually reworking and fine-tuning them all in this phase as well. So I think the 3 dimensions are correct. I don't think they map directly to those 3 phases. I think you're really thinking about them all in each. How else do you see this applying? Yes, please. Yes.
Actually, I would like to use it to beat competition. For example, I would take competition's product, which is somehow similar to mine, take it on board, and basically go through this process to find what's lacking there, like how I can improve it, and basically use it to make my own products better.
Okay, so using this process and actually beginning with not just field research, but some deep competitive analysis. If you have one key competitor.
Company X, there is company Y, which is my competitor.
Yeah, I got it.
Some similar products. So I take their product, I make their product better, but I obviously take this feedback into my own product to beat them.
Okay, I got that. Very good. So I think that's a good way to apply it. How else? Yes, please.
To get the right level of detail and customer needs in terms of both importance, and instead of just solving the obvious problem, take it like to the next level, maybe to discover some of the hidden needs and
Right, right. Yeah, the key point about the hidden or latent needs is they exist. They're just hard to find because they're not well articulated. They're generally not easily articulated by customers. Your competitors probably don't know that either, right? So this is stuff that's not just hidden for you. It's also hidden for everyone else. And what's special about that is, what that means is that could be the real kind of seed of innovation because nobody's figured out how to solve that because they haven't even articulated what that need is. And those needs exist anyway. And so, you know, a simple example that we're all kind of used to today. So here's, you know, the MagSafe connector on my Apple computer here, right? So, you know, this is the power connection, right? Now, you've seen this now for 10 years because the patent's almost expired now. But, you know, for how long were we tripping over power cords on laptop computers and other devices too, right? But particularly for very mobile things like a laptop, we're tripping over the cords all the time. So that need existed. And as clever as that solution is, there's no reason that solution couldn't have been developed 10 years earlier, right? You know, it's just magnets and symmetrical pins and stuff like that, right? And yet somebody made an observation and then made the connection between we trip over the cord, hey, we could solve that, right? And so I think there's tons of opportunities out there. So that point about latent needs, absolutely. That's a really good one. Yes, please.
Create inside existing corporations, create an innovation department using the whole process. How does an existing corporation work? Where does it want to go? And how to implement it?
So some businesses, well-established and even bigger, fairly large companies, have taken this kind of process, made a separate department, and it may be the whole R&D organization, or possibly it's just a portion of it that's doing, you know, blue sky, really out there, creative thinking. And the nice thing about that is they don't have to keep the same culture of the whole organization that's been around for, who knows, 50 or 100 years, right? So, you know, you heard at lunch about Ministry of Supply compared to, say, Brooks Brothers, which has been around for 198 years, right? And so, you know, it's got a culture in a certain way. And if Brooks Brothers wants to be thinking new and different and do this kind of funky, creative clothing and stuff, they may not be able to ever get there. But if you had to, at Brooks Brothers, try to compete with Ministry of Supply and others like that, maybe a separate organization that can think differently and work this way is the way to get there. And so, yes, that is working in bigger established organizations. If they can find a way to partition that off and give them this kind of culture and freedom to be creative. Okay, how else might this be applied? Yes, please. Yeah, and there's actually some really solid research to support that. You know, that shows that, you know, if you add the stress, you know, the creativity doesn't follow. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? All right, I thought you guys did a nice job figuring out and taking apart that IDEO thing. Let me just leave you with a couple of references. There's been a bunch of articles and some books written about and by some IDEO folks. So these first 3 books, you saw actually Tom Kelly in the video. So he wrote these 2 books. this first one, The Art of Innovation, is pretty interesting. It talks a little bit about the process. I love this one, The 10 Faces of Innovation. He talks about how different types of players, people, can contribute in different ways on those teams. It really brings up that point about that kind of eclectic mix of not just different backgrounds, but the roles they play. And they have roles like, you know, the caregiver and the player and the, you know, the experienced architect and stuff like that. And then Change by Design is written by Tim Brown, so the kind of the design thinking guy. And this is the textbook that I referred to that we wrote here, and it's used to teach about product design innovation. And this is a very kind of process-oriented book that goes through the steps in this process in considerably more depth than we talked about today. So that's kind of the sort of the recipe book for that. All right, well, I've enjoyed being with you guys for half a day this week, or well, in your schedule, a quarter of a day, because I know you guys have long days. Best of luck with your innovations and your new businesses. Really, it's great to have you all here at MIT this week. All right.